Hey, everyone. Tonight, we step into a moment so sharp, it cuts through a lifetime of patience. You might not survive this one. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I'm doing here. And while you're at it, drop a comment with your location and local time. Now, turn off the lights. Maybe let a fan run for some gentle white noise, and let's begin tonight's journey together. The crystal chandeliers glimmered over the ballroom, reflecting soft gold across the polished floor. I could hear faint laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the gentle jazz of a string quartet. It should have been a celebration of love, a union to be cherished. But in a heartbeat, everything shifted. Smack, smack. 2 slaps landed across my face, and the world condensed into a blur of pain and disbelief. My glasses flew to the floor, cutting the air as they fell, and my cheek burned with both sting and humiliation. Savannah, my future daughter-in-law, pristine in her white gown, stood before me, her eyes sharp and cruel. Why does an old woman need so much space? Hand over the apartment keys, she demanded, her voice slicing through polite murmurs and music. 200 guests froze mid-cheer. The air thickened with whispers, a mix of pity and contempt. And there, in the middle of it all, my son Caleb's head stayed bowed. He didn't speak. He didn't stop her. His silence was a betrayal deeper than any word could cut. I felt a wave of fire climb my chest, but tears did not follow. Instead, I bent to pick up my glasses, palms steady, breathing slow. My knees shook slightly, but my head remained high. I dug my phone from my black purse and dialed Victor. My voice, steady yet sharp, cut through the tension. Victor, come now. It's time. Within 20 minutes, the man who had always been the quiet guardian of our financial secrets would arrive, and Savannah would see the weight of her arrogance collapse. I could hear the whispers. She should have moved to a nursing home ages ago. Old people don't need that much space. Each word was salt on a wound, each glance a judgment. Yet, inside, something stirred, an old wisdom I'd collected over decades. I thought about my husband Harold, gone 12 years, who used to say, "When they push, that's when you discover your real strength." He was right. My silence had protected my son, taught him humility, but it had also made me a target. Savannah smirked at the crowd, smoothing her dress, a picture of entitlement. I caught the eye of her great aunt, who shook her head with fake pity, and the young friends stifling giggles behind hands. Worst of all, Caleb, my child, once so tender and loyal, did nothing. A year ago, he had proposed to her on a rooftop, beaming with joy. I had congratulated him, hiding the nagging suspicion that Savannah's eyes lingered on my apartment more than on him. Tonight, that suspicion ignited. I felt my resolve harden. My hands were steady, my plan clear. I stepped into the hallway, the hum of music and conversation fading behind me. I touched my cheek, feeling the sting but also a strange calm. In the mirror, an older woman looked back, lined with age yet radiating quiet strength. I whispered to myself, "Enough. Beatrice." They picked the wrong woman to humiliate. Outside the ballroom, Victor arrived, his presence solid and reassuring. The storm was coming, And I was ready. For decades, I had lived simply rising at 6, making black coffee, tending my flower shop work, caring for geraniums and lavender on the balcony. To the world, I was modest, unassuming. To Savannah, I was an obstacle. But tonight, that image would shatter. Tonight, patience and quiet dignity would turn into action. I thought of the apartment by the river, my sanctuary, and how they treated it like a commodity. Every visit from Savannah, every sly remark from Caleb, had been a thread in a web of entitlement. And now, with Victor at my side, I could finally reclaim what was mine: dignity, respect, and the life I had built quietly for decades. The ballroom waited, and soon they would all learn that patience is not weakness, and truth is sharper than any slap. I leaned against the cool wall of the hallway, chest rising and falling slowly, trying to temper the heat that the slap had ignited. Music from the ballroom filtered through, muffled but constant, like the distant hum of a life I had once been part of, but no longer entirely belonged to. I touched my cheek again, tracing the red mark, and thought about Harold. He had always said, "Beatrice, simplicity is armor. Those who value only the glitter will never see the steel beneath." And tonight, I would show them just how unyielding that steel could be. I pulled out my phone again, scrolling briefly through the contacts I rarely used. Victor was the one who had always understood what the world didn't. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't poor, and I wasn't to be underestimated. He was meticulous, precise, a man whose calm made storms like this manageable. I typed a brief message to Mrs. Whitaker, my neighbor, someone whose judgment I trusted implicitly. When I signal, bring the chestnut file to Riverton Grand. No more, no less. Within minutes, her reply came. "B, don't worry. I'll be there." I inhaled deeply and let my mind wander just a little, almost nostalgically. For years, my life had been quiet. Wake early, brew black coffee, drive my 10-year-old sedan to the flower shop, arrange roses and lilies, chat briefly with customers, and return to tend the balcony where geraniums bloomed alongside lavender. That small routine had been my shield against greed and false perceptions. And yet, Savannah had made it clear what was mine was nothing but a target. She had studied my apartment like a hawk, cataloging everything, noting corners, angles, potential value. I shivered slightly but felt no panic, only resolve. The hallway was quiet, almost sanctified in its separation from the ballroom chaos. I straightened my cardigan, the one I had worn that morning, worn at the elbows but neat, a testament to careful preservation rather than ostentation. I thought of the balcony, the small table where Harold used to read the paper, the kitchen where I had brewed countless cups of tea for Caleb over the years. Each object was a memory, each corner a marker of decades lived with dignity and care. Savannah's plan was not just to take an apartment, it was to erase history, to erase me. I closed my eyes and remembered the afternoon a year ago when Caleb proposed on that fancy rooftop. The sparkle in his eyes, the excitement, the announcement over the phone. I had congratulated him, hiding the gnawing suspicion that Savannah's interest lay not in him, but in my possessions. Her eyes had lingered on my apartment, on the flow of my life, with calculating precision. It had seemed harmless at first, but now, slaps ringing in my ears, the whispers behind me, it all made a cold sense. Every word, every sly question, every push to move, every brochure for a senior community, it was a trail leading to tonight. I thought about my own strategy, decades of quiet patience shaping me, teaching me to read people like open ledgers. I had waited for the right moment to act. The chestnut file contained everything: bonds, property deeds, investment statements, proof of every transaction I had quietly handled to shield Caleb, and proof of the slights and manipulations they had attempted to hide. Victor would execute the plan. The ballroom, oblivious, would soon witness a quiet but devastating reckoning. I touched the mirror lightly, seeing lines that had accumulated over decades, yet noticing the sharpness in my eyes that betrayed my age only superficially. This was not weakness, nor desperation. This was focus. I whispered to myself, they wanted a victim. They'll meet a force. It was academically debatable. Perhaps whether old age softened or sharpened a person's cunning. But I knew in my bones that years of careful living had honed a clarity and precision that youth often lacked. Then I heard it, the soft click of the ballroom doors opening behind me. Victor Hale, calm, confident, briefcase in hand, stepping into my little sanctuary of hallway light. I met his eyes and gave a barely perceptible nod. He understood without words. Together, we would walk back into that hall, and Savannah, along with every whispering guest, would see what it meant to mistake patience for passivity. I felt the stir of excitement, the thrill of reclamation. I was about to transform humiliation into power. For a moment, I allowed myself a quirky thought. Even geraniums, stubborn as they were, bloomed under neglect. Perhaps that was a metaphor for me. Neglected, underestimated, dismissed, yet ready to bloom fiercely when the time came. I took a long, measured breath, the Tennessee River glinting faintly through the nearby windows, moonlight stretching like silver ribbons across the water. It reminded me, quietly, that beauty, resilience, and strength could survive, even flourish, in unexpected circumstances. I glanced once more at my reflection. Not just an old widow, I told myself. Not just a mother humiliated. Tonight, I would be the reckoning. And in 20 minutes, the ballroom would witness not just the collapse of arrogance, but the triumph of dignity, careful planning, and the kind of quiet ferocity only years of living fully can instill. Victor and I stepped back into the ballroom together. The music was still playing softly, an almost surreal backdrop to the tension that had coiled in the room. I noticed a few guests raising their phones, whispers turning to pointed stares as if they sensed a shift, an unseen current beginning to crack through the polished veneers. Savannah's smile faltered slightly, a twitch at the corner of her mouth. Though she quickly corrected it, she thought she had control, thought the world saw me as frail and harmless. She was about to learn how wrong she was. I walked slowly, deliberately, every step measured. It was a theatrical pace. Yes, but also practical deliberation meant confidence. Guests leaned forward in their seats, sensing the drama without understanding its magnitude. The chandeliers reflected a kaleidoscope of light across the polished floor, bouncing off Victor's dark briefcase and the small black purse I clutched tightly against my side. Inside that purse rested the chestnut file, modest in appearance, monumental in purpose. Savannah's eyes narrowed the moment she saw me, lips parting to speak. But Victor anticipated her. He raised his hand slightly, a subtle signal that drew all attention to him. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice smooth, calm, and unmistakably authoritative. "I am Victor Hale, financial advisor to Mrs. Beatrice Monroe. I am here to announce that all guarantees Mrs. Monroe previously provided for tonight's wedding have been officially canceled." A murmur swept through the room. Guests shifted, some leaning forward, others exchanging incredulous glances. Savannah froze mid-step, the very picture of shock and panic, while Caleb's eyes widened, his hands tightening in his lap. Victor continued, detailing the $4,000 per month transfers, the rental guarantees, and the wedding deposits. He enumerated each item like a historian recounting evidence from an ancient archive, methodical, precise, undeniable. I felt a flicker of satisfaction, the kind that comes from watching injustice unravel in slow motion. My heart, which had pounded fiercely during the slap, now beat with a calm rhythm. I realized that years of quiet strategy, of patience, of living modestly, had prepared me for this moment. In a world that often discounts older adults as weak or inconsequential, tonight, I was about to demonstrate otherwise. Savannah's lips parted, an attempted retort forming, but I was faster. I opened my purse, pulling out the chestnut file, laying its contents gently on the podium. Bonds, property deeds, investment statements, all verified, all certified, all impossible to dispute. The room went silent, every phone lowered, every eye fixated. The whispers that had once mocked my age, my supposed frailty, now faded into a palpable tension, like the calm before a storm. I spoke, my voice steady, not loud, but sharp, with precision. This is the truth. I have chosen to live simply, to protect my privacy, and to teach humility. That choice does not equate to weakness. Patience does not equate to poverty. And the assumption that I am powerless was your mistake. Savannah, her face went pale, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Caleb shifted uncomfortably, realizing that he, too, had misjudged me. The reality of what I had borne for years, the financial cover, the silent support, the dignity stolen by false pretenses, was laid bare, and it was undeniable. I glanced around, catching the eyes of various guests. Some were shocked, some impressed, some murmuring in admiration. One older gentleman muttered loudly enough for the row behind him to hear. I can't believe she stayed silent for so long. I nodded slightly to myself. That silence had been intentional, a shield, a test of patience, and tonight, it had become my weapon. Victor leaned in slightly, opening another envelope, and continued to detail the support I had provided over the years: the rent, the credit card payments, the insurance bills, and yes, even the wedding deposits I had signed on Caleb's behalf. Each figure rang like a bell of truth, each number a rebuttal to Savannah's smirks and Caleb's avoidance. It was academically debatable, perhaps, whether this display was necessary, or whether dignity could coexist with such a public revelation. But I knew, in my bones, that some lessons had to be learned in the harshest light. Control, greed, and entitlement could only be met with undeniable clarity and evidence. I placed my hand on the file again, feeling the weight of decades of preparation, decades of quiet endurance, and decades of love misused and misinterpreted by those I had trusted. I took a breath, steadying my spine. The fire inside me burned without consuming, a heat of purpose, clarity, and long-earned resolve. Savannah's voice finally cracked, high-pitched and frantic. "This can't be. You're lying. You don't have all this." She looked like a child caught in a lie far bigger than she had imagined. Caleb's face mirrored disbelief, shame, and an unspoken realization of how blind he had been. I met their eyes, unwavering. Weakness is what you wanted me to believe. Truth is what you ignored. The room remained still, a collective pause as the gravity of the moment settled on everyone present. This was no longer a wedding. This was a reckoning. Savannah's hands trembled as she leaned forward, gripping the edge of the podium like it could anchor her in a storm. Her voice, sharp and desperate, cut through the murmur that had begun to rise. "This is a wedding. You can't do this here." I didn't flinch. I had rehearsed the words, yes, but more importantly, I had rehearsed my calm. My face was warm from years of indignity, but my expression was steady. Calmness was the sharpest tool I could wield. I pulled another stack of papers from the chestnut file, sliding it forward for Victor to display. It was a ledger of every penny I had provided for Caleb and Savannah over the last 3 years. Guests leaned in, mouths slightly open. Some whispered in disbelief, others muttered under their breath. She did all this, quietly. One older woman, seated near the back, shook her head in awe. The room's energy shifted from gossip to astonishment, like the tide had turned in the middle of the dance floor. Caleb's shoulders sagged. The boy who once refused to see the pattern of manipulation in his wife's behavior now sat frozen, his eyes darting from me to Victor, as though seeking refuge in authority that could excuse his complacency. But no one could excuse what had happened. Silence, after all, is complicity. I thought about the first time I realized Caleb wasn't entirely immune to Savannah's influence. It had been subtle at first, a tone she used, a word choice that mimicked her, a suggestion framed as casual concern. Over time, it had grown into obedience. He became an echo of her ambitions, a man conditioned to believe his mother was a burden and her home a commodity. I had allowed the illusion to protect privacy, teach humility, but I had underestimated just how exploitable that silence could be. Savannah tried to interject again, this time pointing a trembling finger at me. "You're just trying to humiliate us. You want attention." Victor raised his hand, calm and authoritative. "The documents speak for themselves," he said. "These are legal, certified, and verified. Every transfer, every payment, every guarantee was authorized by Mrs. Monroe. There is no fabrication here." I glanced around the ballroom. The chandeliers reflected light off the polished floor, bouncing in a way that made the stacks of paper shimmer almost theatrically. A strange satisfaction welled in me. I wasn't seeking attention. I was seeking justice. I wasn't shouting, I was demonstrating that patience and foresight could withstand greed and deception, an academically debatable point perhaps. But I felt in this moment that dignity and deliberate strategy carried more weight than anger ever could. The lesson was becoming visible to everyone present. My age, my quiet life, my modest apartment, all the factors Savannah had mocked had been the perfect camouflage. People assumed weakness where there was experience, simplicity where there was wealth, invisibility where there was power. And tonight, the illusion was shattering. I noticed subtle reactions around the room, a few young couples exchanging astonished glances, a few older guests nodding knowingly, and one teenage girl whispering, "That is how you handle bullies." That small observation warmed me more than any applause could. Caleb finally muttered, voice strained, "Mom, I held up a hand, cutting him off gently but firmly. "Son, words are irrelevant now. Actions speak. For years, I covered debts, guaranteed loans, paid deposits, and ensured that your decisions didn't ruin the lives of others. And what did I get in return? Humiliation, disrespect, physical assault. That ends tonight." Savannah's face twisted in fury. She lunged slightly, voice cracking. "You think this is over? You think showing numbers makes you powerful? You're just an old lady." I smiled faintly, not out of cruelty, but for clarity. "Strength," I said softly, "isn't loud. Strength doesn't need to shout. It simply stands, quietly, while lies collapse under their own weight." Victor stepped forward and displayed one final set of documents, a certificate establishing the Monroe Shield Fund. With my assets moved into a legal trust, the murmurs grew louder, spreading through the room like wildfire. Even Savannah's mother, who had been silently observing, furrowed her brow, seemingly realizing the extent of her daughter's audacity. I took a deliberate breath, letting my words hang in the room. Tonight is no longer about a wedding. It is about truth, accountability, and respect. And for anyone who doubted what I was capable of, this is the answer. The room went quiet again. But this time, it was not shock alone. There was a sense of resolution in the air, a collective acknowledgement that the balance had shifted. Caleb lowered his eyes. Silent, Savannah's hands shook. And I felt my spine straighten, shoulders unburdened, ready to step forward into the clarity I had fought for all these years. A quirky fact crossed my mind. Almost humorously amidst the tension, the very chandelier that had reflected the heat of Savannah's slaps now mirrored the cold clarity of truth, like a silent witness to justice. I let that small thought center me. It was a reminder that even in grand, opulent spaces, simplicity, foresight, and courage could triumph over arrogance. Old age wisdom whispered to me, patience is a quiet weapon, and preparation is the shield that outlasts rage. I held both in my hands tonight. The whispers that had swirled like wind through the ballroom slowly began to coalesce into murmurs of recognition, of astonishment, of tentative respect. For a moment, the music had died entirely, replaced by the rustling of papers and the soft intake of breath from nearly 200 people. Some pulled out phones, others whispered to neighbors, and a few older guests simply shook their heads, muttering, "Good Lord, I never would have guessed." Caleb remained slumped in his chair, fingers clenching the edge of the seat. The boy I had once lifted onto my shoulders, who had run laughing through the streets of Nashville with scraped knees and triumphant cries, was now a man caught between shame and disbelief. I could see the inner conflict written across his face, loyalty to a wife who had manipulated him, and the dawning awareness that his mother was not a woman to underestimate. Savannah, however, refused to collapse entirely. She straightened her back, cheeks flushed and tear-streaked, eyes darting around the room like a cornered fox searching for escape. You can't possibly think this is fair," she shrieked, voice pitching higher. "You're just trying to ruin my wedding. Everyone will think." I raised a calm hand. "No one will think anything except the truth. And the truth is, I have provided, protected, and endured far too much to be belittled or silenced. Tonight, everyone can see it." Victor stepped closer, holding the final envelope, the last piece of the chestnut file. "And this," he said, voice carrying easily over the murmurs, "is the final account a legal trust securing Mrs. Monroe's assets, designed to protect her from exploitation. It is legally binding, certified, and irrevocable." The room seemed to hold its breath. The legal weight of my actions settled over everyone like a physical presence, pushing against the remnants of smugness and entitlement. Savannah's face paled further. Her hands twitched, trying to find a grip, a way to reclaim some shred of control. But it was gone. I could almost hear her internal panic. This was not the script she had imagined. Old age wisdom whispered again. Soft but persistent dignity is a currency that cannot be devalued by ignorance or cruelty. I felt the weight of that knowledge settle into my bones. For decades, I had hidden my life's work under a veil of simplicity, careful not to tempt envy or greed. Tonight, the veil was gone, and the world saw what I had protected for myself and for my family. However ungrateful they had become. Caleb finally lifted his head. His voice was small, cracked, hesitant. "Mom, I didn't realize. I cut him off, not harshly, but with deliberate clarity. "Son, it is not realization that matters now. It is accountability. I protected you, yes, but that does not excuse participation in disrespect or complicity in abuse. That stops here." A quirky fact, I thought with a faint smirk, almost absurd in contrast to the tension at the exact moment Savannah had slapped me. I had been calculating the precise time for Victor to arrive so that her arrogance would meet its match. Sometimes, life has its own sense of poetic timing. Guests began to murmur again, some leaning forward, others snapping discreet photos. Social media, I knew, would carry this story far beyond Nashville by morning. That was fine. Let the world see the cost of entitlement and the power of quiet preparation. Savannah's voice cracked, desperation evident now. You'll never let us recover from this." I smiled faintly, soft but unwavering. Recovery is not mine to grant. Respect, accountability, and fairness are not privileges, they are obligations. You have had every opportunity to act with integrity. You chose otherwise. Victor gave me a subtle nod. I knew he was ready to conclude. The legal trust, the documented financials, the public exposure all aligned like pieces in a perfectly constructed plan. No shouting, no threats, only truth, patience, and preparation. Caleb's lips trembled, and he glanced at Savannah, who seemed at a loss for words, her carefully constructed world unraveling. I let them witness it fully. There was no need to raise my voice. Power, I had learned, often spoke loudest in silence, in evidence, in the calm inevitability of consequences. An academically debatable phrase occurred to me sometimes. The illusion of weakness can be a strategic advantage, the very thing that ensures survival against calculated aggression. Tonight, that illusion had served its final purpose. I leaned back slightly, surveying the room. The guests were captivated, some whispering admiration, others shaking their heads at the audacity. Somewhere in the middle, I caught a young woman's wide-eyed gaze. She mouthed, "Wow." It was a small victory, but one that mattered. Even one person recognizing the quiet strength of an older woman battling manipulation was worth every moment. I took a deliberate breath, letting the room settle into silence. "This," I said softly, almost to myself, but audible to anyone listening, "is what happens when preparation meets patience. When dignity is upheld, not negotiated, and when courage refuses to bend under insult." The chandeliers above sparkled, catching the edge of the files like stars in a night sky. I allowed a moment, letting the effect of the truth sink in. I didn't need applause. I didn't need validation. The justice was its own reward. After the last rustle of papers settled, the ballroom felt smaller, almost intimate, despite its grandeur. Guests shifted in their seats, some leaning toward their neighbors to whisper, others frozen mid-bite, glasses poised as if the music might resume. But it didn't. The rhythm of the night had changed. Every eye was on Savannah and Caleb, the couple who had thought they could rewrite reality with entitlement and charm, now caught in a truth they had underestimated. Savannah's hands trembled as she reached for her phone. The social media videos were already lighting up the city. I could see the panic ignite in her eyes, likes, shares, comments streaming faster than she could block them. She clicked frantically, muttering under her breath, "No, no, they can't. They'll think." Her voice broke, and I heard it, clear and ringing, because this time the words weren't mine. It was reality, speaking back to her arrogance. Caleb, still seated, seemed rooted in shame. The man who had once been my bright, energetic son now looked like a child caught in a web of his own creation. His cheeks burned red, lips trembling, eyes avoiding mine, but I didn't need his gaze. I knew he had felt it. The weight of realization is heavier than the slap or the spreadsheets, heavier than the public exposure. Victor stepped aside, giving me a small nod. His presence was steady, a silent reinforcement that what we had orchestrated was precise, measured, and final. He had brought the legal documents, the trust, the chestnut file, all perfectly timed to intersect with the moment Savannah chose to humiliate me. I allowed myself a faint, almost imperceptible smile. Timing, I realized, was as potent as courage. As I spoke then, softly, letting my voice carry through the quiet. Let's be clear. For decades, I lived quietly, modestly, and responsibly. Every sacrifice, every gesture, every quiet act of love was not an invitation for abuse, nor a permission to exploit. Tonight proves that patience has limits, and respect is not optional. A soft chuckle escaped me, almost absurd in the tension. A quirky thought: if this were a movie, the soundtrack would probably swell right now. Violins screaming triumphantly. But life, unlike cinema, had a far sharper edge and sweeter timing. Some guests began murmuring, whispers of admiration rising. "She's composed, so calm." At her age, an older woman said. Another whispered, "I never would have imagined." That's incredible. Even young couples leaned forward, as if taking a lesson in restraint, dignity, and strategic courage. Caleb finally lifted his head. His voice was quiet, trembling, almost a whisper. But it carried unmistakably across the room. "Mom, I didn't see. I didn't know." I leaned forward slightly, maintaining a calm, deliberate posture. "Son, it is not about what you didn't see. It is about what you chose to participate in. Responsibility is not retroactive. Respect is not optional. And consequences, while uncomfortable, are inevitable when one abandons basic decency." Savannah flinched at my words, her eyes wide, mascara streaking like dark rivulets down her cheeks. You can't. You're lying." Her voice broke into shrill desperation. I shook my head slowly. "No, I am revealing the truth. Truth is not negotiable. Truth does not bend to ignorance or entitlement. And tonight, truth speaks louder than manipulation, louder than fear, louder than any selfish plan." An academically debatable phrase passed my mind. Power dynamics are rarely determined by size or strength. They are often dictated by the knowledge one holds and the patience one exhibits. Tonight, that was undeniably clear. Victor handed me the final envelope. Inside were legally certified copies of everything: my financial contributions, the trust, the protection clauses for the apartment and investments. Each page was a nail in the coffin of Savannah's assumptions. Each line a reminder that greed has limits when met with preparation and resolve. I allowed myself a brief moment to breathe, the cool air of the ballroom brushing against my cheeks. I could feel the eyes on me judging, reassessing, some inspired, some envious, some relieved they weren't on the receiving end of this confrontation. I let that energy fill me, a quiet satisfaction without arrogance. A lesson from old age floated in my mind. Calm and unwavering patience without preparation is mere tolerance. Preparation without patience is impulsive. Combine them, and even the boldest arrogance finds its match. Savannah slumped, realizing the magnitude of the exposure. Caleb's lips parted, a faint plea forming, but words failed him. I didn't need them to succeed. Truth had already spoken. Finally, I stepped back, letting the room absorb the full measure of what had happened. My posture was unshaken, my presence steady, my dignity intact. The storm had passed, but the aftershock would linger in every memory and every shared story. The chandeliers above glimmered, casting fragmented light on the polished floor, reflecting both the chaos and the clarity of the evening. I allowed myself a small, private acknowledgement. I had not only reclaimed my apartment, my finances, and my trust, but I had also reclaimed my narrative. The aftermath of the ballroom confrontation didn't fade quietly. It echoed into the following morning like a persistent drumbeat. Even before I opened my eyes, the buzzing of my phone hinted at the chaos I had left behind. Notifications piled up: texts, emails, and social media alerts from friends, strangers, and those who had witnessed the slap and its fallout. It was overwhelming, but strangely comforting. For the first time in decades, my actions were validated beyond my own small circles. I sipped black coffee at the kitchen table, feeling the warmth seep into my hands. There was a peculiar sense of calm amid the storm. I remembered Harold's advice: chaos is merely clarity in disguise, if you watch closely. I had watched, and now the clarity was mine. Comments streamed in from people all over Texas, Oregon, New York. A grandmother wrote about her grandson pressuring her to sell her home. An older man detailed how his children had siphoned his retirement. They weren't just stories, they were echoes of the injustice I'd just confronted. Victor called around mid-morning, his voice steady but tinged with excitement. "Beatrice, the online reaction is incredible. People are sharing your story like wildfire. Caleb and Savannah are being publicly called out for their manipulation. It's remarkable." I allowed myself a small smile, a flicker of satisfaction. And yet the work had just begun. Caleb, predictably, started contacting me again. The first few calls were hesitant, almost apologetic, though underlined by fear. "Mom," I didn't realize I cut him off politely but firmly. "Son, the realization isn't enough. You must understand the consequences of actions, not just feel guilt. We'll discuss restitution later. Right now, it's about boundaries." Savannah's texts arrived in waves, each more frantic than the last. "You can't do this. You'll ruin us. Think of the baby. How could you?" Her attempts to weaponize pregnancy against me failed to provoke anger. I read them, set my phone down, and let the words float by like leaves on a stream. The baby wasn't part of the negotiation. Respect and responsibility were the non-negotiables, and I was done compromising them. A quirky fact came to mind. Did you know humans can survive up to 30 days without food, but only a few minutes without integrity? The parallel struck me as both humorous and sobering. Tonight's actions weren't about revenge, they were about preserving what could never be replaced: dignity, autonomy, and justice. I spent the afternoon preparing the next steps with Victor. We organized files, screenshots, and affidavits, anticipating every possible legal maneuver Caleb and Savannah might attempt. The petitions, social media threats, and their increasing desperation were predictable. They underestimated both my resolve and the meticulous groundwork Victor and I had laid. Later, Mrs. Whitaker stopped by, her face a mixture of concern and admiration. "Beatrice, if I didn't know you, I'd never guess you were a quiet florist. You've orchestrated everything so calmly, it's inspiring." She handed me a freshly baked loaf of bread. I smiled. Calm is part of the armor. "Thank you." The evening brought a quieter sense of reflection. Sitting on the balcony, I watched the Tennessee River glimmer under the fading sun. The city hummed below, oblivious to the private justice unfolding above. I traced the patterns of the water, thinking about the lessons embedded in this ordeal. Old age wisdom surfaced. A mother's strength isn't measured by how much she gives, but by how fiercely she protects what is rightfully hers. I had protected more than my property. I had protected my story, my values, and my right to exist with autonomy. By nightfall, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. This wasn't the end. There were calls to answer, people to guide, and a legacy to build. But for the first time, I moved through the space unburdened by fear or hesitation. My hands rested on the balcony railing, steady, the cool wind brushing against my silver hair. In that moment, I realized the battle wasn't about defeating them, it was about reclaiming myself. The next morning, I woke to a stillness that felt almost alien after the chaos of the previous day. The apartment was quiet, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft clinking of the river against the embankment below. I brewed a pot of black coffee, inhaling the bitter aroma that had become the rhythm of my mornings. There was no urgency, no pressing demands from Caleb or Savannah yet, and for the first time in months, I felt a fragile sense of control here. Victor arrived mid-morning, carrying a thick folder and an unflappable calm that made me feel like a strategist rather than a widow under siege. "Beatrice, we need to map out the responses," he said, settling in the small dining area with the meticulousness of a general. "They're desperate, which makes them dangerous. But desperation is also predictable." He tapped the folder. Inside were compiled screenshots, transcripts of texts, legal notices, and records of their financial recklessness. I traced my fingers over the documents, the weight of them reassuring. Every number was a thread, a tangible proof of the manipulation and exploitation I had endured. Caleb attempted his first face-to-face encounter since the wedding. He came to the door, slouched, hesitant, eyes scanning for an immediate point of leverage. "Mom," he started, voice low, almost pleading. I think we need to talk about everything." I cut him off before he could frame it as an apology or a demand. "We will talk when respect is demonstrated, not when fear or guilt drives the conversation." His shoulders slumped, and he left without protest, which in a way was progress. He realized he couldn't bully his way back in. Savannah, of course, didn't wait. Texts began to flood my phone. "You can't do this. Stop humiliating us. Think of the baby. Give us a chance." Her use of the unborn child as leverage made my stomach twist, but I refused to engage. I set the phone aside and pored over Victor's notes instead. Strategy, clarity, preparation. Those were the tools of power. Her desperation was a reflection of her recklessness. An academically debatable phrase crossed my mind. Is the moral authority of age inherently stronger than the impulsive entitlement of youth? Watching their panic, I felt certain that, in this instance, it was. I spent the afternoon organizing a small network. Mrs. Whitaker volunteered to monitor the building discreetly. Nora had begun documenting Savannah's reconnaissance around the apartment. Every small detail added to the web of evidence that would ensure that no one could ever question my competence or intent. A quirky fact lightened the tension pigeons. I remembered, can recognize human faces for years, even decades. Perhaps my calm observance was similar, recording, remembering, and waiting for the right moment. By evening, the phones had quieted, giving me a chance to step onto the balcony. The city lights reflected on the river like stars scattered across liquid glass. For a moment, I closed my eyes, imagining Harold beside me, whispering, "This is your moment, Beatrice. Stand firm." I breathed in the night air, letting the subtle chill remind me that strength often comes from stillness. I was no longer a passive observer. Each calculated step I had taken, each document, each silent move had turned the tide. And I knew, deep down, that the final confrontation had not yet occurred, but when it did, I would meet it with the composure of someone who had spent a lifetime quietly mastering patience. Tonight, I told myself I would rest. Tomorrow, the real reckoning would begin, and I would meet it with dignity intact. A quiet fury held just beneath the surface. The morning air was crisp, carrying a faint scent of wet leaves from the Tennessee River. I sat at the small kitchen table, black coffee steaming in front of me, my hands wrapped around the mug as if holding on to courage itself. Today was not a day for anger. Today was a day for precision. Each text, each call, each recorded instance of manipulation and entitlement had to be considered. Victor had warned me that Savannah and Caleb would escalate now that their initial attempts had failed. I welcomed it. Chaos was predictable if you controlled it. By 9:30, my phone buzzed with Caleb's name again. I ignored it, letting it ring. If he wanted dialogue, he would have to come on terms that respected me, not demanded what I had already earned and fought for. The silence was heavier than any argument. Every minute that passed without me replying tightened the boundary I was establishing. Victor arrived mid-morning, calm as ever, carrying another folder. "Beatrice, we need to reinforce the strategy," he said. His tone was quiet but commanding, a tone that made me feel like a general ready for a battlefield rather than a 69-year-old widow. He laid the folder on the table. Inside were compiled receipts, texts, videos, and legal records. Each piece was a brick in the fortress I was building around my independence. I ran my fingers over the thick stack. The weight was tangible, and so was the reassurance. Every line of text, every financial entry, proved the extent of Caleb and Savannah's overreach. As we reviewed the documents, I caught myself thinking about old age wisdom. Sometimes patience is not passive, it is active strategy. My silence, my measured steps, all counted for more than any outburst ever could. Around noon, Savannah texted again, this time more desperate. "Mom, reconsider. This isn't fair. The baby will suffer." I set the phone aside. Emotional manipulation would not sway me. The baby, I reminded myself, was innocent, but it was also a tool she believed she could use to bend me. I would not allow it. A quirky observation from my garden floated through my mind. Lavender keeps pests away from other plants. Maybe life had sent me a reminder some things, no matter how delicate, thrive only with protection. That was my role now. Victor and I spent the afternoon preparing for the inevitable legal escalation. Every document was checked, every potential loophole anticipated. My son had once been a small boy, trusting and innocent, holding my hand in the park, promising, "I'll always protect you, Mom." Now he was a man caught between obligation and fear. He would falter. Savannah's panic would make her reckless. All of it would play into the hands of justice. As evening approached, I stepped onto the balcony. The river shimmered under the soft glow of the city lights, and I let a small smile escape. The quiet power of observation, the careful accumulation of evidence, was a weapon far sharper than anger. My dignity was intact, my plan unfolding, and for the first time in years, I felt truly untouchable. Tomorrow, the confrontation would escalate. But I was ready. My hands may have been old, but they held strength in restraint. My voice may have trembled in youth, but it now carried authority, and my heart, though bruised, was unshakable. The next morning, sunlight filtered gently through the lace curtains, spilling across the living room floor. I brewed my usual black coffee, inhaling the earthy aroma, savoring the calm before the storm. Victor arrived promptly, briefcase in hand, looking as composed as ever. "Beatrice," he said, "today, everything moves into motion. They won't see it coming." His confidence was a balm to my frayed nerves. I nodded, adjusting my cardigan as I rehearsed the rhythm of my day coffee. Deep breath. Walk along the balcony, then straight to the courthouse. There was a quiet thrill in knowing that patience had its own rewards, that years of careful observation and discreet management were about to pay off. On the drive to Davidson County Courthouse, I noticed the subtle shifts in my posture, shoulders back, chin lifted, each step deliberate. Nashville's autumn air smelled faintly of damp leaves and distant smoke. I imagined Savannah pacing, her white gown still faintly in memory, her confidence slowly cracking as she realized the public had caught the first glimpse of her true character. My son, Caleb, would follow her cues, trembling between loyalty, guilt, and learned behavior. But this time, I would be the one defining the rules. Victor handed me a folder just before entering the courthouse. It was thicker than the previous one, packed with all the proofs. Every transaction, every text, every email, every witness statement organized meticulously. "We've built a wall that even the most cunning cannot scale," he whispered. I traced my fingers over the neatly stacked pages. Each was a testimony, not only to my long-suppressed vigilance, but also to the audacity and entitlement Caleb and Savannah believed they could wield unchecked. The courtroom buzzed quietly with anticipation. Cameras from local media had been discreetly allowed inside an academic point. I noted public scrutiny often discourages further attempts at deceit. Savannah's eyes narrowed when she caught mine, searching for fear or hesitation. She found none. My lips pressed into a thin line. Calm was my armor. The hearing began. Their attorney, sharp and rehearsed, presented their case with the precision of someone confident in manipulating older adults' images. Mrs. Monroe displayed impulsive behavior at the wedding, disrupted family harmony, and is clearly incapable of managing finances independently. Each word echoed through the room, but the absurdity of it only strengthened my resolve. "Impulsiveness," they said. Ha! I had sat quietly, collected evidence, and orchestrated a strategy more careful than most people's entire legal careers. Shun. Victor called the first evidence forward. Videos of the wedding flashed across the large screen. Savannah's slap, my reaction composed, deliberate, and then my return with the chestnut file. Calm and authoritative. Gasps fluttered across the room. Some guests whispered. Others blinked in disbelief. The truth, I realized, had a weight heavier than any lie they could spin. Kayla, my niece, was first to testify. She described overhearing Caleb and Savannah plotting to push me into a care facility, detailing every condescending and manipulative remark. Mrs. Whitaker followed, recounting Savannah's attempts to monitor my apartment, her stealthy reconnaissance, and repeated invasions of my privacy. Each account built upon the last, layering a portrait of calculated manipulation that even an academically debatable skeptic would struggle to dismiss. As the courtroom held its collective breath, the judge, a stern man with sharp gray eyes, finally spoke. His voice resonated. After reviewing the evidence and witness testimony, it is clear that Mrs. Beatrice Monroe has been the subject of sustained financial and psychological abuse. The petition for a competency evaluation is denied. The plaintiffs are admonished formally and are responsible for all court costs. Relief washed through me, but it was quiet, tempered with the gravity of what had been endured. Walking out afterward, the crisp air felt electric. The leaves crunched under my feet like applause in slow motion. Savannah and Caleb lingered behind, their faces pale. The arrogance of weeks evaporated under the exposure of truth. The lesson was clear: patience, vigilance, and dignity are formidable weapons. And for the first time in years, I felt unshakable. The following weeks were a strange mix of quiet and chaos. The courthouse victory had given me a shield, yet the aftershocks rippled through every corner of my life. The local news coverage had been relentless, and my inbox flooded with supportive messages from complete strangers, grandmothers, widowers, even young adults who had witnessed similar family manipulations. Each message was a small affirmation, a reminder that my struggle was not isolated. I pored over them in the mornings, sitting at my small kitchen table with a cup of mint tea, feeling a warmth I hadn't known for years. There was a quirky, almost comforting fact. I noticed the human instinct to cheer for dignity is universal, transcending age and geography. Victor visited often, each time with a new strategy, ensuring the Monroe Shield Fund was operational. Our first calls to older adults in distress were slow, delicate. Some were hesitant, embarrassed, or downright terrified to admit they were being exploited. One woman in Memphis whispered that her grandson threatened to have her committed if she didn't sign over her house. My heart ached for her, but I understood the calculus of fear and secrecy. I told her calmly, "You're not alone. We'll walk this path with you." Old age wisdom whispered here, courage often grows in quiet steps, not grand gestures. Meanwhile, Savannah tried subtle attempts at communication. Texts, emails, sometimes calls, each one veiled with excuses about the baby or promises of change. I didn't respond, not out of malice, but as a firm boundary. Their attempts to manipulate had already proven that their concern was transactional, not genuine. I learned early on in life that consistency in action communicates far louder than any words. Caleb finally attempted to reconcile with me, showing up at my apartment, eyes weary and hesitant. He stumbled through apologies, but the pattern of dependence on my resources was unchanged. I could have slipped back into old habits, offered him temporary relief, but that was no longer my path. Instead, I set clear boundaries. I told him calmly that forgiveness didn't equate to enabling, that respect must precede any financial help. He left with a mixture of shame, frustration, and perhaps realization. The academically debatable point, sometimes the harshest love is the most protective, especially when the consequences are real and lasting. As autumn deepened, the Monroe Shield Fund grew steadily. We formalized a hotline, a pro bono legal team, and informational workshops. Older adults who once thought they had no voice now called, seeking guidance, sharing stories, reclaiming autonomy. I remember a woman from Franklin who had been coerced into signing over her savings. We guided her through the steps to regain control. The joy in her voice over the phone was a balm, a validation that the fight had expanded beyond my personal struggle. My own life, once defined by isolation and cautious routine, now pulsed with purpose. The most profound change, however, was internal. The years of quiet endurance, the repeated humiliations, the constant monitoring by Caleb and Savannah, all of it had forged a resilience I had not known. I walked through my River Point apartment differently. Each flower on the balcony, each worn chair, each corner of my modest home became a testament to survival, autonomy, and the quiet power of dignity. Simple gestures, watering plants, brewing tea, reading by the window felt charged with significance. Public speaking invitations began to arrive. Universities, civic organizations, and senior advocacy groups wanted me to share my story. Initially, I hesitated. I had spent decades blending into the background, practicing discretion. But then I remembered Leslie Grant's words. "Your story is a gift for those suffering in silence." And I realized the truth speaking up was not just an act of courage, it was a responsibility. I prepared meticulously for each engagement, often using subtle humor to ease the weight of the stories I told. One quip that became a favorite: if a 69-year-old widow can outmaneuver a wedding planner, imagine what you can do with your own finances. Audiences laughed, yet the lesson sank in. Dignity and vigilance are contagious. Even the simple act of walking along the Tennessee River, the same path I had once taken to escape stress or reflection, felt profoundly different. The wind carried a sense of freedom. Each step reminded me of lessons learned: patience, observation, and steadfastness can dismantle years of deceit. Every ripple of the river reflected the new rhythm of my life, a life where boundaries are respected, autonomy is protected, and strength rises from the quietest corners. Winter came softly to Nashville, bringing early evening shadows that stretched across the River Point apartment. I often sat on my balcony with a thick sweater, sipping dark coffee, watching the city lights shimmer on the Tennessee River. There was a quietness in the cold air, a reflective calm, as though the world itself had paused to take notice of what I had endured and accomplished. The weight of the past 2 years had shifted, not vanished, but transformed into something purposeful. Every slap sting, every whispered insult, every deceitful plan now fueled a resolve I had never felt before. That quiet power became my armor. The Monroe Shield Fund had grown beyond what Victor and I initially imagined. Calls came from elders across Tennessee, from nearby states, some even from across the country. Each story mirrored fragments of my own struggle: silent coercion, subtle intimidation, financial manipulation, family members masking exploitation as care. Every call reinforced the same lesson: dignity is the first casualty of deception, but it can be reclaimed with courage and planning. I learned another curious fact: most abusers rely on the victim's silence, and when that silence breaks, the illusion collapses instantly. One evening, Caleb attempted a visit, showing a rare hesitation in his steps. Savannah was with him, heavily pregnant, a nervous tightness in her voice. I invited them in, but this time, everything had changed. I no longer flinched at their presence or waited for them to impose. Instead, I set clear boundaries. The baby, I explained calmly, would have nothing to do with our past financial disputes. Their eyes widened. They expected guilt, submission, but found only clarity and measured authority. The old age wisdom I silently recalled was simple yet profound love is never a free pass for exploitation. The holidays approached, and the River Point apartment glowed with soft lights and wreaths. I reveled in small joys, baking spiced apple bread, arranging the balcony geraniums with snow-dusted leaves, listening to distant carols drifting across the river. The life I had feared I'd lost was not only regained, it was richer, layered with purpose. Victor occasionally visited, each time bringing updates from the fund or counsel on ongoing cases. We laughed quietly over small office mishaps and absurd calls one older gentleman had mistakenly called asking if we could repossess his grandson's couch. Humor became a balm, proof that resilience need not be grim. By February, I was invited to speak at a senior advocacy conference. Standing on the podium, I felt a mixture of nerves and exhilaration. Leslie Grant's advice echoed, "Your story is a lighthouse. It guides others through stormy waters." I shared the slap at the wedding, Caleb's silence, Savannah's manipulation, and the ultimate courtroom victory. I detailed the legal mechanisms, the importance of documenting abuse, and the simple, quiet power of planning. My voice trembled only once. When describing the moment I realized my own son had treated me as an obstacle. The audience, hundreds of faces, were rapt. Some cried, some nodded solemnly. Others took notes. The academically debatable observation occurred to me: elder abuse is often systemic, not isolated, and awareness is as vital as law in combating it. The most unexpected joy came from the letters and messages afterward. I received words of gratitude from people who had been trapped by family greed for decades. One elderly woman in Memphis recounted how she reclaimed her home after being threatened with a care facility by her daughter. A widower from Tennessee wrote that my story inspired him to confront financial manipulation by his son. The ripple effect was both humbling and empowering. My fight had become theirs, and in return, I drew strength from their courage. At home, the quietest victories felt the sweetest. Mornings with fresh coffee, afternoons with a pair of gardening gloves and a watering can, evenings spent reading the classics or listening to jazz records, all of it infused with a new awareness of life's preciousness. I could hear the Tennessee River gurgle below, a constant reminder that life continues in its rhythm, regardless of chaos elsewhere. I learned that control over one's own life and possessions is itself a form of freedom, and that dignity, once regained, reshapes every subsequent choice. Caleb and Savannah gradually faded from my daily life. Attempts at manipulation or guilt trips diminished as they realized I was unyielding. The baby was born into a household where they learned early that I would not be coerced, but neither was I cruel. The family had been forced to adjust to a reality where boundaries mattered. Respect was non-negotiable, and truth could no longer be hidden. The River Point apartment, once a quiet refuge, became a symbol of autonomy and strength. Every flower I planted, every book I read, every meal I prepared was a testament to life lived on my own terms. The trust established for my grandchild remained intact, untouched by manipulation, a safeguard for the innocent amidst chaos. I found humor in the everyday Caleb's awkward attempts at reconciliation, Savannah's sharp glare at family gatherings, the slightly crooked teacup still on the kitchen shelf, reminders that life, after upheaval, can still be vivid, real, and quietly satisfying. I often whispered to Harold in the evenings, we did it. We built more than wealth. We built armor. The quiet city lights glinted off the river like distant applause. I realized, with a gentle smile, that dignity is not merely maintained in solitude. It is cultivated, defended, and shared. Every story I now tell, every life I help, is a thread in the tapestry of protection and empowerment. The slap, the betrayal, the lawsuits, the TV appearances, all were chapters in a narrative where patience, observation, and decisive action forged an unshakable core. I sit now, looking out over the water. 73 years old, alone but unbowed. My balcony plants sway gently in the wind. My inbox buzzes with calls for help and gratitude. My steps are lighter, my heart steadier, my mind alert. I have learned that life's true wealth is not measured in bank balances or property deeds, but in autonomy, courage, and the ability to stand, unyielding, when the world expects submission. And as I sip my evening tea, I smile softly to myself, knowing that the storm I endured was transformed into a beacon for others, a story that might prevent a grandmother, a widow, or a father from ever feeling powerless again. Looking back over the past years, I see a journey that transformed every moment of humiliation into a stepping stone for empowerment. From the slap in the ballroom to the quiet planning in my River Point apartment, each event reinforced a single truth. Dignity is never a gift. It must be claimed and defended. I learned that patience can be both armor and trap, and that silence can protect, but it can also enable those who wish to exploit you. My son's complicity, Savannah's manipulations, the threats, and the lawsuit all served to sharpen my resolve. With the help of Victor and the trust I established for my grandchild, I ensured that control over my life and my legacy could never again be taken by coercion. The Monroe Shield Fund now stands as a living extension of that lesson, protecting older adults from the very abuses I faced. Every case we take, every call answered, is a reminder that vigilance, preparation, and courage can turn vulnerability into strength. And yet, the most important victories are quieter mornings on my balcony, tending geraniums and lavender, watching the Tennessee River glint, listening to jazz records, and savoring the autonomy I fought so hard to reclaim. What began as a private struggle became a public mission. I have shared my story on television, through speaking engagements, and in my book, helping countless others recognize the signs of abuse and reclaim their rights. My life, once constrained by others' greed, now flows freely, guided by respect, purpose, and self-determination. The River Point apartment, the balcony plants, the simple routines, they are symbols of resilience, reminders that even after betrayal and loss, it is possible to rise, stand tall, and live fully on one's own terms. May this story inspire every listener to protect their dignity, speak their truth, and never underestimate the quiet power of a determined heart.